Hi everybody, we're going to look at the neighbourhood health profiles. So we're going to have a look at this one here. This is for Stannington neighbourhood, and what you can see here, Stannington, you can see at the beginning of the neighbourhood profiles that you've been given, there are some key observations, so some particular facts about Stannington, for example where it is, and some important pointers about it. So for Stannington, the vast majority of the population is aged over 45 to 50, in the 45 to 54 age group, and the deprivation levels are generally lower, and that, as we might expect with a lower deprivation, they've got less health problems and less problems with the other wider determinants of health, such as educational attainment and attendance. If you scroll down through, the next thing you can see when you look through the health profiles is a map. So here's a sort of rough outline of Stannington here, and you can see that outline in black, that's Stannington area. And then if you scroll down a bit more, you get population pyramids. So when we look at the population pyramid for Stannington on the left versus the Sheffield population pyramid on the right, you can see in the Sheffield population pyramid there's that big bulge around the 20 to 25 age group, which is predominantly because we're a university town, so we get a lot of students coming in. When you look at the Stannington population profile, you can see that that same bulge is missing, and there are relatively few students. And in fact for Stannington the population bulge occurs much later, and that 50 to 55 age group, both in men and in women, men on the left, women on the right, and so that tends to let us know that this is generally a neighbourhood with older population, and you can expect that they might be slightly more affluent. As you slide down, the next part that's useful to have a look at is a breakdown of the ethnicity of school children. We don't have great ethnicity figures for the entire population, so that's why we use school children as a kind of representative measure. And as you can see here, for Sheffield, there is probably about 75% of the population roughly is white, whereas for Stannington, more than 95% of the population is white. You can see for Sheffield there are significant numbers of ethnic minorities, whereas for the Stannington population that's not true. And then when you get down to the next bar, you can have a little look at the breakdown of the population relative to the rest of Sheffield and the age breakdown. Now that red line in the middle is the Sheffield average, the white dots are where Stannington scores for each score, and the grey bar represents the range of values. So there's the white dots for each score and a description of what they are. The bit that the arrow is showing you there is the Stannington value as opposed to the Sheffield average value. There's the Sheffield average marker. All of these are scored in white because they haven't tested the statistical significance of these. And the grey represents the potential range of values across Sheffield. As we'll see when we get further down, if something is tested for significance, it'll either be yellow, which is that there is not an obvious statistically significant difference, green if there is a statistically significant difference and it's better, or red if it's a statistically significant difference and it's worse. Now the next thing you can look at that's quite useful is this breakdown of where people are going to the GP, so which practice the people living in this neighbourhood attend. As you can see here, about roughly a third are attending Stannington Medical Centre, another third are attending the other local medical centre, and then on the right hand side you can get some idea of the which locality the GPs are organised into. So the GP practices in Sheffield are broken down into 4 localities: North, West, Hask and Central, and almost all of the Stannington population are attending practices in the West locality. This is mostly of use to the GP locality managers. If we scroll down a little bit further, we can look at some health indicators, and to start with, we've got some general indicators. Now remember here, things on the left side of the Sheffield average mean that they're worse than the Sheffield average. On the right side mean that they're better than the Sheffield average. So that red line is the Sheffield average. Something, if it's statistically significantly better, will be in a green diamond. If it's statistically significantly worse, it'll be in a red square. And if there isn't a statistically significant difference, it'll be in a yellow dot. For some things we haven't tested the significance, so it'll be in a white dot. So here we go. There's a value for Stannington of multiple deprivation. As you can see, it's on the good side of the Sheffield average, but there isn't an obvious statistically significant difference compared to the rest of Sheffield, although there's probably quite an important difference, even though it's not statistically significant. That's using something called the index of multiple deprivation, which you can Google and find out all about. It's basically a combined score to measure levels of deprivation in populations in the United Kingdom. And it's a composite measure including things like rates of unemployment, who has access to a car, how much education people have attained, and a range of other key informants that help us get those sorts of scores. If we scroll down now, you can see we've also got a look at other wider determinants of health. So we've got things like the crime rate, which you can see for Stannington is that green diamond, so it's statistically significantly better than for the rest of Sheffield. And it's one of, you can see looking at the grey range there, Stannington's crime rate is one of the lowest in Sheffield. Some other wider determinants there like school attendance. And if we scroll down a bit, we can look at life expectation. And so life expectancy for Stannington and all their various mortality scores are all green there, so all significantly better than we'd expect in the rest of Sheffield. So the values that you see there are the rate that's calculated, and then underneath the values you've got a confidence interval, and that's the range within which we'd expect 95% of the values to fall, or where we'd be 95% confident that the real value should fall. Where the confidence intervals don't overlap, you can say that something is statistically significant or there's a definite difference between the two. I'll scroll down a bit more. Now the next box gives you an idea of hospital activity, things like rates of people getting admitted through A&E, getting admitted as emergency admissions, or coming in for elective procedures. And again, you can see for Stannington, with its relatively affluent, healthy population, relatively low rates of admission for hospital, with the exception of children and elective admissions over the age of 65, which, given that Stannington's got quite a high population over the age of 65, it's not too surprising that they're making a little bit more use of elective services. Now if we go down to lifestyle indicators, you can see there's the first one, first red dots for Stannington, but by and large most of the things for Stannington they're in green. When we look at some of the red dots, we've got things like the smoking quit rate. Well, for Stannington you'd expect the smoking quit rate to be relatively low because the number of smokers is relatively low. Also there's this figure here for obesity. Be careful because that is a modelled figure. What modelling means is that it's estimated using computer guesses based on the age profile and other factors of the population, so it's not a real measured number. And for Stannington this is relatively worse than the rest of the Sheffield population. We get similar figures for a range of health indicators for children and young people, and for a range of different disease groups that you might want to have a look at. Mental health factors, and again for Stannington, all doing relatively well on the right side of that Sheffield average line. And then at the bottom of the health profiles there's a little reminder of how to interpret all of it and a breakdown of how those scores were derived, so you can have a look at that. And then if we scroll down from there, you get the sources of the data that each indicator has been derived from. So these are quite useful if you want to go back and check the sources and see whether it's changed, whether anything's different, or you want to compare it with a different area, or potentially compare it with a different area of the country where these neighbourhood health profiles haven't been put together. That's pretty much what we're going to get, and I hope you enjoy using the health profile. They're very useful.